You know how some mistakes feel small when you're making them, but then they unravel your entire life? I'm sitting here 2 years later, finally ready to admit that I orchestrated the destruction of the best relationship I'd ever had. My name is Isabella Hayes. I'm 31 now, and this is a story of how I lost someone who actually loved me because I couldn't tell the difference between love and control. It was fall of 2019, and I'd been dating Connor for 8 months. 8 beautiful, comfortable months that should have been the foundation for something lasting. Connor was a history teacher at the local high school, the kind of man who got genuinely excited about Revolutionary War documentaries and could spend an hour explaining why the Library of Alexandria's destruction was historically overblown. He had this way of making the mundane feel special, like when he'd bring me coffee in bed on Saturday mornings and tell me stories about his students' latest antics. But somewhere around month 6, I started feeling restless. Not with Connor exactly, but with the predictability of it all. He'd text me good morning every day at 7:15, right after his first period prep. We'd have dinner together twice a week, always Tuesday and Friday. He'd call me on his drive home from work, and we'd talk about our days while he sat in traffic on Route 9. It was lovely, really. Stable. The kind of relationship my mother had always told me to look for. So why did I feel like I was suffocating? My sister Carmen had different ideas about what I needed. At 28, she was newly divorced and full of opinions about modern dating. Men need to be kept on their toes, she'd say, during our Sunday brunches. The moment they get comfortable, they stop trying. Look at what happened with Mike. 5 years of marriage and he couldn't even remember our anniversary. Carmen's divorce had been messy, full of accusations about emotional neglect and taking each other for granted. She'd emerged from it convinced that her mistake had been being too accommodating, too easy. You have to make them work for you, Izzy. Otherwise, they'll walk all over you. I started noticing things about Connor that I'd previously found endearing. The way he'd absently pat my knee while we watched movies instead of holding my hand properly. How he'd sometimes get so engrossed in grading papers that he'd give me distracted responses when I talked. The fact that he'd stopped complimenting my outfits unless I specifically asked if he liked what I was wearing. Were these signs that he was taking me for granted, or just the natural evolution of a comfortable relationship? At the time, I was convinced it was the former. The breaking point came on a Thursday in October. I'd spent an hour getting ready for our dinner date, wearing a new dress I'd bought specifically because the blue matched my eyes. When Connor picked me up, he said I looked nice. Nice, not beautiful or stunning or any of the words I'd been hoping for. At dinner, he spent 10 minutes talking about a particularly challenging student before asking about my day. When I mentioned that I'd had a difficult conversation with my boss about a project deadline, he offered solutions instead of just listening. By the time he dropped me off at my apartment, I was simmering with resentment. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Where was the man who used to notice when I changed my shampoo? Who used to ask follow-up questions about my work drama and remember the names of my difficult clients? That night, I called Carmen. He's getting too comfortable, I complained. It's like he's already decided he has me, so why bother trying anymore? You need to shake things up, she said immediately. Remind him that you have options, that he needs to work to keep you. Men respect women who have standards. But how do I do that without being manipulative? Carmen laughed. Honey, relationships are manipulation. The trick is being good at it. You need to show him what life would be like without you. Make him remember why he fell for you in the first place. The idea she planted grew in my mind over the next few days. I started imagining Connor's reaction if I told him I needed more from our relationship. He'd probably realize how complacent he'd become, apologize profusely, and start putting in effort again. Maybe he'd even suggest we move in together or start talking about a future. The thought was intoxicating. I planned it for a Sunday afternoon. Connor came over to watch a football game, settling onto my couch with the casual familiarity of someone who'd done this dozens of times before. He kissed my cheek hello and asked if I had any beer in the fridge. Such a small interaction, but it crystallized everything I'd been feeling. The casual kiss, the assumption that my refrigerator was his refrigerator. The way he immediately reached for the remote without asking what I wanted to touch. "Connor, we need to talk," I said, muting the television. He looked surprised but attentive. "Everything okay?" I'd rehearsed this conversation in my head, but sitting there looking at his concerned face, I almost lost my nerve. This was Connor, who brought me soup when I was sick, who'd helped me move apartments without being asked, who listened to me complain about my coworkers with genuine interest. But Carmen's voice echoed in my head. Men respect women who have standards. "I don't think this is working anymore," I said, my heart pounding. "I feel like you've stopped trying, like you're taking me for granted. I deserve someone who's excited to be with me, not someone who treats me like a comfortable habit." Connor's face went very still. "I take you for granted? When's the last time you planned a surprise for me? Or noticed when I dressed up for you? You used to text me throughout the day just to check in, and now I'm lucky if I hear from you between morning and your drive home." "I text you every morning before work," he said quietly. "The same text. Every day. Good morning, beautiful. Hope you have a great day." It's like you've put it on autopilot. Connor was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him processing what I'd said. This was it, the moment he'd realize his mistake and fight for us. Instead, he nodded slowly. "You're right. I have gotten comfortable. Too comfortable, apparently." He stood up. "If I'm not making you happy anymore, then maybe we should end this before it gets worse." This wasn't the script I'd written in my head. "That's it? You're just going to give up? You said you deserve someone who's excited to be with you." I thought I was that person, but clearly I'm not. He picked up his jacket from the back of my chair. "I don't want to keep disappointing you." I stared at him, speechless. He was supposed to argue, to promise he'd change, to ask for another chance. "Connor, wait. I didn't say I wanted to break up. I just wanted you to know how I've been feeling." But he was already at the door. "I care about you too much to stay when you've told me I'm not enough." He paused with his hand on the doorknob. "I hope you find someone who appreciates you the way you deserve." And then he was gone, leaving me sitting alone on my couch, staring at the muted football game and trying to figure out what had just happened. I called Carmen immediately. "He left," I said, still in shock. I told him I felt taken for granted, and he just left. "He's playing hard to get," Carmen said confidently. "Give him a day or two to panic, then he'll come crawling back. Men always do." But Connor didn't come crawling back. My phone stayed silent that night, and the next morning brought no good morning text for the first time in 8 months. I checked my phone obsessively, convinced I'd somehow missed his message. By Tuesday, I was starting to worry. By Friday, I was in full panic mode. I drove by his apartment building after work, telling myself I just wanted to see if his car was there. It was, but there were no lights on in his windows. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, waiting for some sign of life, before feeling ridiculous and driving home. That weekend, I swallowed my pride and texted him. "Hey, can we talk?" I think there was a misunderstanding. The message showed as delivered but unread. I waited 3 hours before sending another. "Connor, please. I miss you." Still nothing. I called, and it went straight to voicemail. I tried Instagram and found that he'd blocked me. Facebook, same thing. It was like he'd erased me from his digital existence overnight. I spent Sunday alternating between rage and desperation. How dare he ghost me like this? After 8 months together, didn't I deserve at least a conversation? I called Carmen, seeking validation for my anger. "He's being completely immature," she agreed. "You were just trying to communicate your needs like any healthy adult would. The fact that he's giving you the silent treatment instead of working on the relationship shows you were right to question his commitment." Her words soothed my wounded ego, but they didn't fill the growing hollow feeling in my chest. I missed Connor with an intensity that surprised me. Not just the relationship, but him specifically. The way he'd get animated when talking about his students. How he'd absently play with my hair when we watched movies. His terrible jokes that somehow always made me laugh anyway. I started driving by places we used to go together, hoping for a glimpse of him. The coffee shop where he'd grade papers while I read. The bookstore where he'd disappear into the history section for an hour at a time. the hiking trail where we'd spent lazy Saturday mornings. I never saw him, which somehow made his absence feel even more complete. 2 weeks after our conversation, I ran into his colleague Janet at the grocery store. I'd met her a few times at school events when I'd gone with Connor. "Isabella," she said, seeming genuinely pleased to see me. "How are you doing?" "I'm good," I lied. "How's Connor?" Her smile faltered slightly. "He's well. He's been pretty quiet lately. We all assumed you two had broken up, but he won't talk about it. He's thrown himself into work, staying late every day, volunteering for extra duties. I've never seen him so focused on avoiding his personal life." The image of Connor burying himself in work to avoid thinking about me should have been satisfying. Instead, it made me feel sick. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was supposed to miss me and want me back, not shut down completely. "If you see him," I said carefully, "tell him I said hello." Janet nodded, but something in her expression suggested she wouldn't be passing along that message. That night, I made a decision. If Connor wanted to be stubborn and refused to communicate like an adult, I'd have to take matters into my own hands. I drove to his apartment building and buzzed his unit. "Connor, it's me. We need to talk." Silence. "I know you're up there. I can see your light on." More silence. Then the intercom crackled. "Go home, Isabella." "Not until we talk. I'm not leaving." "Then you'll be standing there a long time." I stayed for 2 hours, occasionally buzzing his apartment and getting no response. A neighbor finally came out and told me I needed to leave or she'd call the police. I drove home humiliated and more confused than ever. This wasn't the Connor I knew, the man who'd spend an hour on the phone helping me decide which couch to buy, who'd never once raised his voice at me in 8 months. Where was the gentle, patient person I'd fallen in love with? As October turned into November, I had to face the possibility that Connor wasn't coming back. The realization sent me into a spiral of self-doubt and regret. Had I made a terrible mistake? The more time passed, the more I realized that the things I'd complained about, the routine texts, the comfortable familiarity, the way he'd absently show affection, weren't signs that he'd stopped caring. They were signs that he'd felt safe with me, secure enough to be himself without constantly performing. I started remembering all the ways Connor had shown love that I'd somehow overlooked. How he'd automatically ordered my coffee the way I liked it. How he'd text me photos of things that reminded him of me throughout the day. How he'd rearrange his lesson plans to accommodate my schedule when I had work events. How he'd listen to me talk about reality TV shows he had no interest in, because he knew I enjoyed sharing those thoughts with him. What had I done? By Thanksgiving, I was desperate enough to try a grand gesture. I showed up at his apartment building with his favorite takeout from the Thai place we used to go to, planning to apologize and beg for another chance. But when I buzzed his apartment, a woman's voice answered. "Who is it?" My blood turned to ice. "I'm looking for Connor Walsh." "He's not available right now. Can I take a message?" I hung up without responding and sat in my car, shaking. A woman was at Connor's apartment at 9 o'clock on a Friday night, answering his intercom like she belonged there. It had only been 6 weeks since our breakup. How had he moved on so quickly? The next few days were torture. I couldn't stop imagining who she was, how they'd met, whether she was prettier than me. I created fake social media accounts to try to gather information, but Connor had locked down all his profiles. The only clues came from mutual friends' posts, and even those were sparse. Connor had apparently become much more private since our breakup. I finally got confirmation of my worst fears when I saw them together at the downtown Christmas market in December. Connor was with a petite brunette who looked nothing like me. She was laughing at something he'd said, and he had that relaxed smile I remembered from our early days together. They looked comfortable together, natural, like they fit. I followed them at a distance, telling myself I was just curious, just trying to understand how serious this was. They held hands while walking through the stalls, shared a hot chocolate, stopped to pet a dog, all the casual intimacies that Connor and I had shared. He was now sharing with someone else. When they stopped to look at handmade ornaments, I got close enough to hear their conversation. "This one reminds me of my grandmother's tree," the woman was saying, holding up a delicate glass angel. "Then we should get it," Connor said immediately. "Our first Christmas ornament." Our first Christmas ornament. The words hit me like a physical blow. They were already making plans, already thinking of themselves as a unit. Connor had not only moved on, he'd moved on completely. I managed to make it back to my car before the tears came. Ugly, choking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep in my chest. I'd lost him, not temporarily, not as part of some game or test, but permanently. Connor was building a new life with someone else while I was still stuck in the wreckage of what we'd had. The holidays were unbearable. Every tradition Connor and I had started together felt hollow now. The Christmas movie marathon we'd planned, the New Year's Eve party we'd talked about attending, the quiet moments between Christmas and New Year's when we'd usually spend hours in bed, talking about our hopes for the coming year. Instead, I spent most of December alone, declining invitations from friends because I couldn't bear to pretend I was okay. Carmen kept insisting that Connor's new relationship was just a rebound, that it wouldn't last. But as winter turned to spring, it became clear that whatever Connor had with this woman was real. I'd catch glimpses of them around town, at the farmer's market, walking their dog. When had Connor gotten a dog? Having dinner at restaurants we'd never been to together. They looked settled, happy, like they were building something. Meanwhile, I was stuck. I couldn't seem to move forward, couldn't stop measuring every potential date against Connor, couldn't shake the feeling that I'd thrown away something irreplaceable. My work suffered. My friendships grew strained as I became the person who couldn't stop talking about her ex. I was becoming someone I didn't recognize, bitter, obsessive, unable to accept that my own actions had consequences. The final wake-up call came in late spring, almost 8 months after our breakup. I was at a coffee shop downtown when Connor walked in with his girlfriend. They didn't see me tucked away in the corner, and I watched as they ordered their drinks and found a table near the window. Connor looked good, better than I'd seen him look in months when we were together. He seemed lighter somehow, more animated. He was telling his girlfriend a story, using his hands to gesture the way he did when he got excited about something. She was laughing, completely focused on him. And I could see the way her face lit up when he smiled. It hit me then, watching them together, that Connor wasn't happy despite our breakup. He was happy because of it. I'd spent 8 months convinced that he was the one missing out, that he'd made a mistake in letting me go. But sitting there watching him with someone who clearly adored him, I realized that Connor had done exactly what he needed to do. He'd recognized that our relationship had become unhealthy and had the courage to walk away from it. I told him he wasn't enough for me, but the truth was that I hadn't been enough for him either. Not because I wasn't smart enough or pretty enough or successful enough, but because I'd approached our relationship like it was a game to be won rather than a partnership to be nurtured. I'd confused love with control, commitment with compliance. Connor had loved me, I could see that now. He'd loved me enough to text me every morning, to make our dinner dates a priority, to listen to my day-to-day dramas with genuine interest. He'd loved me enough to build routines around me, to make me a consistent part of his life. And when I told him that wasn't enough, he'd loved me enough to let me go, instead of trying to convince me to stay somewhere I claimed to be unhappy. I'd been so focused on what I thought I deserved that I'd never stopped to consider what Connor deserved. He deserved someone who appreciated his steady love instead of mistaking it for complacency. Someone who saw his daily texts as sweet rather than automatic. Someone who valued the security of knowing exactly where they stood with him. He'd found that person, clearly, and I was still sitting alone in coffee shops, watching other people live the life I'd thrown away. That night, I did something I should have done months earlier. I wrote Connor a letter, not to win him back or to explain my side of the story, but to finally take responsibility for my mistakes. I told him that I understood now why he'd ended things, that I was sorry for the way I'd treated our relationship like a test he was failing. I thanked him for the 8 months we'd had together and told him I was glad he'd found happiness. I never sent the letter. Connor had moved on, built a new life, found someone who appreciated him properly. The last thing he needed was me inserting myself back into his story. But writing it helped me finally begin to understand the difference between love and possession, between having standards and being impossible to please. It's been 2 years now since that Sunday afternoon when I told Connor he wasn't enough for me. I've done a lot of therapy, a lot of soul searching, a lot of work on understanding why I needed to control the relationship, instead of simply enjoying it. I've learned to recognize the difference between a partner getting comfortable and a partner getting complacent. I've started to understand that real love often looks like routine, like small daily choices to show up for each other, like the quiet security of knowing someone will be there. I still think about Connor sometimes. Wonder if he and his girlfriend got married, if they're happy. I hope they are. I hope he found in her what he'd been trying to give me all along, someone who saw his love for what it was instead of what it wasn't. As for me, I'm dating someone new now. Andrew is different from Connor in many ways. More spontaneous, less predictable, someone who keeps me guessing in ways that used to seem important to me. But I find myself appreciating the small consistencies he offers too. The way he calls when he says he will. How he remembers the things I tell him about my day. The fact that he seems genuinely happy to see me, even after we've been together for several months. I catch myself sometimes when Andrew texts me the same good morning message 3 days in a row, or when he absently holds my hand while we walk instead of making a production of it. The old Isabella would have started wondering if he was getting too comfortable, if I needed to shake things up to keep his interest. But I've learned something valuable from losing Connor. Sometimes the most profound love is the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't need to prove itself with grand gestures, because it shows up consistently in small ones. I'm not perfect at this new understanding. There are still moments when I feel that old restlessness, when I wonder if I'm settling for something too easy. But now I stop and ask myself what I'm really afraid of. Am I actually unhappy? Or am I just scared that happiness doesn't have to be earned through drama and uncertainty? The truth is, I destroyed the best relationship I'd ever had because I couldn't tell the difference between being loved and being chased. I mistook Connor's security for indifference, his consistency for taking me for granted. I turned a man who adored me into someone who had to protect himself from me. I can't change what I did to Connor, but I can make sure I never make that mistake again. Real love isn't about keeping someone on their toes. It's about being able to stand flat-footed together and still choose each other every day. It's about building something stable enough to weather the inevitable storms, not creating those storms to test the foundation. Connor taught me that, even though he probably doesn't know it. In walking away when I told him he wasn't enough, he showed me what it looks like to value yourself enough to leave a situation that isn't working. In refusing to fight for a relationship I'd declared inadequate, he demonstrated a kind of self-respect I'm still learning to emulate. I hope someday I'll be able to love someone the way Connor loved me, completely, consistently, without reservation. And I hope I'll be wise enough to recognize that kind of love when I receive it, to nurture it instead of testing it, to see it as the gift it is rather than the given I once mistook it for. Some mistakes teach you who you are by showing you who you don't want to be. Losing Connor was that kind of mistake for me. It cost me everything, but it also gave me the chance to become someone worthy of the kind of love I'd been too foolish to appreciate when I had it. That has to be enough.